The applause in the grand ballroom was deafening, washing over Gabe like a tidal wave he wasn't allowed to surf. He watched his wife, Vanessa, squeeze the arm of the celebrity chef, her smile brighter than the flashbulbs blinding them. She was celebrating the dish of the year, a recipe Gabe had perfected over 3 sleepless nights in a cramped prep kitchen while she slept. If you want to witness how a man can be erased from his own life in a single sentence, and how cold revenge is best served, stay with me. The air in the ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton smelled of expensive reduction sauce and old money. Under the crystal chandeliers, the elite of Chicago's culinary scene mingled, a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns swirling around tables laden with silver. Gabe Stone adjusted his collar for the 10th time. The shirt was starched stiff, scratching at his neck. It was a size too small, bought on sale at a discount outlet because Vanessa had insisted every spare dollar go into her dress. And God, the dress was worth it. Vanessa stood 3 feet away from him, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her curves like a second skin. She was radiant, her laughter bubbling up as she leaned into Dominic Sterling. Dominic, the man whose name was on the marquee, whose face was on the cookbook covers, and whose ego took up more space than the centerpieces. "Stop fidgeting, Gabe," Vanessa murmured out of the side of her mouth, not breaking her smile for the food critics standing in front of them. "You look like you're waiting for a bus." "I'm tired, Van," Gabe said quietly. He looked down at his hands. The burns on his knuckles from the salamander broiler were covered with concealer Vanessa had applied in the Uber. "I haven't slept in 48 hours. "We'll sleep when we win," she hissed, her eyes snapping to his for a fraction of a second. "Just stand there and look supportive. Please." Gabe swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. He was the one who had stayed up for 2 days straight, reducing the veal stock for the osso buco that was being served tonight. He was the one who had balanced the acidity in the truffle vinaigrette when Dominic had nearly ruined it with too much lemon. And here they are. A booming voice interrupted them. It was Marcus Thorne, the most feared food critic in the Midwest. The dream team behind the Sterling. Dominic stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "Marcus, a pleasure as always. The velvet venison you served tonight." Marcus closed his eyes, kissing his fingertips. "Transcendent. Truly. The balance of the juniper berry with the dark chocolate reduction? That is genius, Dominic. Pure genius. Where did the inspiration come from?" Gabe's heart hammered. This was it. The sauce was his grandmother's recipe, tweaked with a modern technique he had spent months perfecting. He looked at Vanessa. "Tell him," he pleaded silently. "Just tell him we did it together." Dominic chuckled, swirling his scotch. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa beamed, wrapping a possessive arm around Dominic's bicep. "Oh, you know Dominic," she laughed, her voice musical and charming. "He wakes up with these visions. He's the artist. I just make sure the lights stay on." Marcus nodded, impressed. Then, his gaze drifted to Gabe, who was standing slightly behind them, blending into the wallpaper. "And who is this?" Marcus asked, gesturing with his glass. "I've seen you in the background at the restaurant a few times." The silence stretched. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of Gabe's lungs. He waited for Vanessa to say, "This is my husband, my sous chef, the man who runs the kitchen while Dominic does interviews." Vanessa glanced at Gabe. Her eyes were flat, devoid of the warmth he used to see when they were broke and dreaming of a food truck. She calculated the social cost of the truth versus the easy lie. "Oh, that's just Gabe," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "He helps out with the lunch prep. Burgers, salads, that sort of thing. We brought him along for the experience." "Burgers," Dominic smirked. "He's a good kid. Keeps the grill clean." The table chuckled. A polite, condescending ripple of laughter. Gabe felt a physical crack in his chest. It wasn't the sound of a heart breaking. It was the sound of a foundation collapsing. 10 years of support. 10 years of working double shifts so she could buy the shoes she wanted. 10 years of ghost writing the recipes that made them rich. Reduced to a burger flipper. "Well," Marcus said, losing interest instantly. "Someone has to peel the potatoes, right?" "Exactly," Vanessa said, turning her back on Gabe to toast with Dominic. Gabe stared at the back of her neck. He saw the diamond necklace he had bought her, on a payment plan that took him 2 years to pay off, glittering under the lights. He didn't say a word. He didn't throw his drink. He simply turned around. "Gabe," Vanessa called out, half turning as she sensed movement. "Where are you going? Getting a refill?" "I'm done," he whispered. "What?" The music drowned him out. "I said I'm done." He walked away. He wove through the tables, past the servers carrying trays of the food he had designed, past the laughing faces of people who would never know his name. He reached the heavy oak doors of the ballroom and pushed them open. The blast of Chicago winter hit him like a physical blow. The wind howled down State Street, carrying snow that bit at his exposed skin. He didn't have a coat. He had left it at the coat check, but he couldn't bear to wait in line. He walked out onto the sidewalk, the snow instantly soaking his thin dress shoes. He looked back at the golden glow of the hotel windows one last time. He could see the silhouette of his wife, laughing, her head thrown back, living the life he had built for her. He turned his collar up against the wind and began to walk. He wasn't going back to the restaurant. He wasn't going to the after party. He was going to disappear. The wind off Lake Michigan was a physical assault, a razor-edged gust that cut through the thin cotton of Gabe's dress shirt as if it weren't there at all. He walked down Michigan Avenue, a lone figure in a soaked tuxedo, his head bowed against the driving snow. Passers-by in thick parkas glanced at him with a mixture of pity and confusion, likely assuming he was a drunk straggler from a holiday party. But Gabe didn't feel the cold. Or rather, the cold outside was finally matching the temperature inside his chest. His shoes, cheap leather loafers with no grip, slipped on the icy slush with every step, but he kept a rhythmic, marching pace. Left, right, chop, stir. The rhythm of the kitchen. It was the only thing that kept him moving. He replayed the moment in the ballroom on a loop. Just Gabe. He flips the burgers. It wasn't the insult that festered. It was the ease with which she delivered it. It was a reflex. To Vanessa, he wasn't a partner. He was a utility. A dull knife in a drawer full of shiny, expensive gadgets. By the time he reached their apartment building in River North, his lips were blue and his fingers were stiff claws. The doorman, a kindly older man named Henry who usually greeted Gabe with a joke about the weather, looked up from his desk in alarm. "Mr. Stone? Good Lord, where is your coat? You're freezing." Gabe didn't stop. He couldn't speak. If he opened his mouth, he was afraid a scream would come out instead of words. He just nodded once, a jerky, mechanical motion, and headed for the elevators. The apartment was warm. It smelled of the expensive reed diffuser Vanessa insisted on, sandalwood and ambition. Gabe stood in the entryway, dripping dirty slush onto the pristine hardwood floors. He looked around the living room. The beige sectional, the abstract art that cost more than his car, the glass coffee table. None of it was his. He lived here, but he left no imprint. He was a ghost in his own home long before tonight. He walked into the kitchen. This was supposed to be his sanctuary, but even here, Vanessa's influence was a stranglehold. The counters were marble, beautiful but impractical because they stained too easily with lemon juice. The stove was an electric induction model because she liked how sleek it looked, even though he hated cooking without fire. On the island, there was a bowl of soup from lunch, a vichyssoise he had made for her because she complained of a headache. It sat untouched. A film of congealed cream settled on the surface. She hadn't eaten a spoonful. She had been too busy texting Dominic about the seating charts. Gabe stared at the cold soup. A dish meant to be served chilled, but not like this. Not stale. Not rejected. He went to the bedroom and pulled a duffel bag from the back of the closet. He didn't pack clothes. He didn't pack the cashmere sweater she bought him to make him look presentable for her friends. He walked back to the kitchen and opened the one drawer that was truly his. Inside lay his knife roll. It was old leather, stained with grease and oil. Inside were his Wusthof and Shun knives, the blades he had sharpened every morning for 10 years. They were extensions of his hands. He rolled the leather tight and placed it in the bag. Next, he reached for the top shelf of the pantry, behind the quinoa and the gluten-free pasta, and pulled out a tattered notebook. His grandfather's recipe journal. The pages were yellowed, smelling of old paper and dried rosemary. This book contained the soul of his cooking, the very soul Dominic and Vanessa had strip-mined for profit. He zipped the bag. It was light. 10 years of marriage, and this was all he had to show for it. He walked back to the island. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline fading as the thaw set in, bringing a stinging pain to his extremities. He twisted the gold band on his left ring finger. It was tight, stubborn, as if the metal itself didn't want to let go. With a sharp tug, he worked it loose. A pale band of skin remained, a scar of commitment. He looked at the bowl of vichyssoise one last time. Slowly, deliberately, he dropped the ring into the center of the cold, white soup. It didn't make a splash. It just sank, disappearing beneath the opaque, creamy surface, drowned in the very effort he had wasted on her. Gabe picked up his duffel bag. He didn't leave a note. Notes were for people who expected to be understood. Vanessa would never understand this. She would only understand the absence. He walked out the front door, leaving it unlocked. He didn't look back at the warmth. He stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and checked his watch. The late-night train to O'Hare Airport left in 40 minutes. He had just enough time to disappear before the appetizer course was cleared. The key scratched against the lock 3 times before Vanessa managed to shove the door open. She stumbled into the foyer, kicking off her Louboutins with a groan of ecstasy and pain. The apartment was dark, save for the ambient glow of the city filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long, pale stripes across the floor. "Gabe?" she called out, her voice a little too loud, slurring slightly at the edges. "I hope you're not pretending to be asleep. Dominic wants us to come to the after-party at the aviary. They're opening a vintage Krug." Silence answered her. It was a heavy, dense silence, the kind that usually followed their arguments, but tonight it felt different. It lacked the tension of a waiting fight. It felt vacant. Vanessa rolled her eyes, steadying herself against the wall. She was still buzzing from the gala, the adrenaline of the win mixing potent cocktails with the 3 glasses of champagne she'd downed in the limo. She felt invincible. They had won. She had won. The Dish of the Year award was going to sit on the mantel, right next to the framed photos of her and Dominic that she insisted were good for branding. "Come on, Gabe," she muttered, walking into the living room. She tossed her clutch onto the sofa. "Don't be a child. I know you're mad about the burger comment, but you have to understand the optics. Marcus Thorne doesn't care about the team. He cares about the star." She flipped on the kitchen lights. The sudden brightness made her wince. The kitchen was exactly as she had left it hours ago, pristine, cold, sterile, except for the island. The bowl of vichyssoise was still there. Vanessa frowned. Gabe was usually obsessive about cleaning up. He never left food out. It was one of his annoying little habits, treating their home kitchen like a sterile lab. "Lazy," she whispered, shaking her head. "You leave the mess for me, is that it?" She walked over to the island, intending to dump the soup down the disposal. As she reached for the bowl, something glinted under the recessed halogen lights. A flicker of gold amidst the creamy white liquid. She paused, her hand hovering over the ceramic rim. She leaned in closer, squinting. There, sunk to the bottom of the bowl like a heavy stone, was a gold band. Vanessa's breath hitched for a second, but it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was annoyance. A hot, prickly wave of irritation. She reached 2 fingers into the cold, congealed soup, grimacing at the texture, and fished the ring out. She held it up to the light, dripping white soup onto the marble counter. "Gabriel." The inscription inside was barely visible through the grime of the soup. "Oh, for God's sake," she laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. So dramatic. She walked to the sink and rinsed the ring off, tossing it onto a paper towel to dry. This was Gabe's move. The silent protest. The martyr act. He did this whenever he felt undervalued. He would retreat, go quiet, maybe sleep in the guest room for a night or 2 until she bought him a nice bottle of wine or let him pick the movie on Saturday night. Leaving the ring in the soup was a new touch, though, a bit theatrical for him. She pulled out her phone and tapped on his contact. "I found the ring. Very artistic. Stop sulking and come home. We need to discuss the press release for tomorrow morning." She hit send. The message bubble turned blue, then showed delivered. But it didn't switch to read. She waited a minute, staring at the screen. Nothing. Fine, she said to the empty room. Freeze out there. See if I care. She opened the fridge to grab a bottle of water and noticed the gap on the top shelf immediately. The space where the quinoa and the pasta usually sat was disorganized, as if someone had reached behind them. She stood on her tiptoes. The leather-bound notebook was gone. That gave her pause. The ring was a symbol, a gesture she could ignore. But the notebook? That battered, grease-stained journal was Gabe's Bible. He never took it anywhere. He used to joke that if the building caught fire, he'd save the book before he saved himself. A flicker of unease curled in her stomach, cutting through the champagne haze. She walked quickly to the bedroom. The closet door was ajar. She scanned his side. His suits were there. His shoes were there. His coats were there. But the space on the top shelf where he kept his old gym bag was empty. She stood in the center of the bedroom, the silence suddenly feeling very loud. He hadn't just gone for a walk. He hadn't just gone to a bar to cool off. He'll be back, she said aloud, her voice sounding small in the large room. He has nowhere to go. He has no money. He has no connections. She stripped off her emerald dress, letting it pool on the floor, too tired to hang it up. She climbed into the king-sized bed, taking the center spot that she usually had to fight him for. It felt enormous. Cold. She looked at her phone again. Still no reply. He'll be back by breakfast, she reassured herself, pulling the duvet up to her chin. He needs me. Who else is going to pay the rent? She closed her eyes, forcing herself to think about the award, the applause, the way Dominic had looked at her. But as sleep dragged her under, the image behind her eyelids wasn't the trophy. It was the ring, sitting alone at the bottom of a cold bowl of soup, waiting to be recovered by someone who actually cared. 6 months later, the kitchen of the Sterling did not sound like a well-oiled machine. It sounded like a crash site. The rhythm Gabe had instilled, the quiet, focused tap-tap-tap of knives, the low murmurs of behind and corner, had been replaced by the jagged shouting of a ship taking on water. It's split. The emulsion is split again. Dominic's voice cracked, high and hysterical, cutting through the steam. He slammed a whisk onto the stainless steel counter, sending droplets of yellow hollandaise splattering onto the pristine white tiles. Who prepped the butter? I said clarified, not melted. You idiots are ruining me. Vanessa stood at the expediter station, her arms crossed, her nails digging into the silk of her blouse. She watched the chaos unfold through the glass partition. The sous chef, a young hire named Marcus who had a resume thicker than a Bible but hands that shook under pressure, was trying to salvage the sauce. He looked terrified. Chef, the temperature was... Marcus started. I don't care about the temperature. Dominic roared, wiping sweat from his forehead. He wasn't wearing his chef's whites. He was in a designer black t-shirt that showed off his tattoos, better suited for a photo shoot than a dinner rush. Fix it. Table for has been waiting 30 minutes for the scallops. Vanessa turned away, her stomach churning. In the old days, 6 months ago that felt like a lifetime, Gabe would have fixed this before it even became a problem. Gabe would have sensed the butter was too hot just by the smell. He would have stepped in, whisked it back to life with a splash of cold water and a steady hand, and sent the plate out perfect, all without raising his voice above a whisper. She walked into her office and closed the door, muffling the shouting. The room was a sanctuary of awards and framed magazine covers, but the air felt stale. On her desk sat a manila envelope from the private investigator she had hired 3 months ago. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. She had memorized the summary. Subject untraceable. No active credit cards. No social security activity. No forwarding address. Subject has effectively ceased to exist. Gabe hadn't just left. He had scrubbed himself from the earth. Vanessa sat down and opened her laptop. She clicked on the Eater Chicago tab she had kept open all morning. The headline stared back at her, a bruised purple font against the white screen. The Sterling, still shiny, but where is the soul? She scrolled down to the third paragraph, the words burning into her retinas. The atmosphere is still electric, and the wine list is impeccable. But something has shifted on the plate. The signature venison, once a revelation of balance, now feels heavy, almost clumsy. The flavors are fighting each other rather than dancing. It's as if the music has stopped in the kitchen and everyone is just going through the motions. Dominic Sterling is a star, certainly, but one wonders if his light is beginning to flicker. Vanessa slammed the laptop shut. The door to her office burst open. Dominic strode in, his face flushed red, smelling of burnt garlic and expensive cologne. "Did you see the ticket times?" he demanded, pacing the small room. "The line cooks are incompetent. I need to fire them. All of them." "You fired the last 3, Vanessa said, her voice tired. "Dominic, you can't fire everyone. We're running out of staff." "Then get me better staff." He slammed his hand on the desk. "I am Dominic Sterling. People should be begging to work for me." Vanessa looked at him, really looked at him. For years, she had seen the charisma, the brand, the golden ticket. Now, she saw a man who didn't know how to fix a broken emulsion. She saw a mascot who had started to believe he was the team captain. "It's not the staff, Dom," she said quietly. "Excuse me." He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "It's the recipes," she said, testing the water. "They're inconsistent. Since Gabe left." Dominic's face darkened. The vein in his neck pulsed. "Don't say his name. He was a chopper, a prep cook. I wrote those menus." "Did you?" Vanessa asked. "Then why can't you fix the scallops?" "I am the visionary," Dominic shouted, the facade slipping completely. "I don't have time for the minutiae. That's what sous chefs are for." He stormed out, leaving the door wide open. The noise of the kitchen flooded back in. The clanging of pans, the shouting, the sound of things falling apart. Vanessa looked at the empty chair across from her desk. That was where Gabe used to sit during menu planning, notebook open, sketching out ideas while she and Dominic drank wine and talked about marketing. He would look up, push his glasses up his nose, and say, "I think if we add a little fennel pollen to the crust, it will cut the richness." She reached out and touched the wood of the desk. "Where are you?" she whispered. But there was no answer. Only the crash of a plate shattering on the floor outside, followed by silence, and then, inevitably, more shouting. The rot had set in, and for the first time, Vanessa realized she didn't have the tools to cut it out. 5 years in the restaurant industry is not a long time. It is a lifetime. It is enough time for a trend to die, for a palate to shift, and for a kingdom to crumble into dust. Vanessa sat in the darkened dining room of the Sterling. It was 7:30 p.m. on a Friday, a time that used to see a line stretching out the door and down the block. Now, there were 3 tables occupied. 2 tourists nursing tap water and a shared appetizer, and an elderly couple who looked like they had wandered in by mistake. The silence was heavier than the snow piling up against the windows. It was the sound of irrelevance. Vanessa rubbed her temples, staring at the tablet on the table. The numbers were bleeding red. They were 3 months behind on rent. The vendor for the Wagyu beef had cut them off last week, forcing them to switch to a cheaper domestic cut that Dominic tried to mask with excessive truffle oil. It hadn't worked. The Yelp reviews were brutal. Overpriced, stale, has been. Stop looking at it. You'll burn a hole in the screen. Dominic emerged from the kitchen, glass in hand. He wasn't cooking. He rarely cooked anymore. He spent his nights supervising, which mostly meant drinking the vintage inventory that they could no longer sell. His face was puffy, the sharp jawline buried under years of stress eating and denial. The charismatic celebrity chef was gone, replaced by a bitter man who blamed the world for his mediocrity. "We have to make payroll on Monday, Dom," Vanessa said, her voice brittle. "I had to put the linen service on my personal credit card again." "So? We'll bounce back." Dominic slurred slightly, waving his hand. "I have a new concept. Fusion. Italian-Japanese. It's going to be huge." "No one wants your fusion, Dominic," Vanessa snapped, the veneer of the supportive wife finally wearing thin. "They want Sanctum." The name hung in the air like a curse. Sanctum, the restaurant that had opened 2 years ago in a converted warehouse in the meatpacking district. It had no signage, no phone number, and no social media presence. You couldn't book a table, you had to be invited. It was the most exclusive dining experience in North America. The press called the head chef the ghost because he never came out of the kitchen, never gave interviews, and never allowed photographs of his food. They were everything the Sterling used to be, but sharper, darker, and infinitely more successful. Sanctum is a gimmick, Dominic spat, downing his drink. Smoke and mirrors. Whoever runs it is probably some trust fund kid playing chef. They are looking to acquire spaces, Vanessa said, ignoring him. She tapped the screen. I reached out to their holding company, Voronoi Group. Dominic froze. You did what? We are not selling. I am not selling my legacy. You don't have a legacy anymore, Dominic. You have debt. Vanessa hissed, slamming her hand on the table. The elderly couple jumped. Vanessa lowered her voice, trembling. We are drowning. If we don't merge, we close. Next week. That is the reality. Dominic stared at her, the fight draining out of him. He slumped into the chair opposite her, looking suddenly small. They replied. I've been emailing their director of operations for a month, Vanessa admitted. She refreshed her inbox. They said the principal is interested in our location. The lease is valuable, even if the brand isn't. A soft ping echoed from the tablet. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She tapped the notification. It was an email from info@sanctumchicago.com. Subject, meeting confirmation regarding acquisition proposal. Her hands shook as she opened it. Dear Ms. Stone, the principal has reviewed your preliminary figures. He is intrigued by the potential of the asset. We are willing to meet to discuss a possible acquisition of the Sterling's lease and liabilities. The meeting will take place at Sanctum. Tomorrow night. Midnight. After service. Come alone. Or with Mr. Sterling. Do not be late. Midnight. Dominic muttered, reading over her shoulder. Arrogant bastards. They're throwing us a rope, Vanessa said, a wave of relief washing over her, so potent it almost made her dizzy. She looked around the empty, dying restaurant. She saw the dust on the chandeliers, the frayed carpet near the entrance. She hated it. She hated the failure. We go, she said firmly. We go and we charm them. We make them think they need you as the face of the new location. We get a buyout, maybe a consulting contract. I can charm anyone, Dominic said, straightening his jacket, trying to summon the ghost of his old swagger. I'm Dominic Sterling. Vanessa looked at him, feeling a pang of pity mixed with revulsion. She didn't tell him that the email didn't mention his name, only the asset. She didn't tell him that she was terrified. She looked out the window at the Chicago winter. The snow was falling harder now, burying the city in white. Somewhere out there, in the dark heart of the industrial district, the owner of Sanctum was waiting. Get some sleep, Dom, she said quietly. Tomorrow is the most important night of our lives. She didn't know how right she was. The meatpacking district at midnight was a canyon of brick and iron, the streetlights reflecting off the black ice that coated the cobblestones. The taxi dropped them off in front of a nondescript steel door set into a warehouse wall. There was no valet, no awning, no brass plaque. Just a small, rusted intercom box. This is it. Dominic sneered, shivering in his cashmere overcoat. It looks like a slaughterhouse. That's the point, Dominic. It's brutalist chic, Vanessa said, though her own nerves were vibrating like a plucked wire. She pressed the buzzer. There was no voice on the other end. A harsh metallic clack signaled the lock disengaging. Vanessa pushed the heavy door open. They stepped from the biting wind into a corridor of absolute silence. The walls were raw concrete, lit by strips of recessed amber light that ran along the floor. The air was different here, cool, filtered, smelling faintly of wood smoke and ozone. It didn't smell like food, it smelled like ceremony. A hostess appeared from the shadows. She was dressed in severe, architectural black, her face impassive. Mr. Sterling. Ms. Stone, she said, not asking a question. The principal is expecting you. Follow me. She led them through a heavy velvet curtain and into the dining room. Dominic stopped walking. He stared. The room was vast, the ceiling vanishing into darkness. There were only 10 tables, spaced far apart, each illuminated by a single, pinpoint spotlight that made the tablecloths glow like altars. But it was the kitchen that stole the breath from Dominic's lungs. It was an open kitchen, separated from the diners by a sheet of glass, so clear it was invisible. Inside, 12 chefs moved in a ballet of terrified precision. There was no shouting, no clanging of pans, just the rhythmic shhh of sharp steel slicing through protein and the hiss of searing meat. It was a laboratory of edible worship. "Look at that equipment," Dominic whispered, a hunger in his voice that had nothing to do with food. "That's a custom Molteni stove. That range alone costs more than my house." "Keep moving," Vanessa hissed, tugging his arm. She felt shabby here. Her dress, which had felt expensive in the mirror, now felt loud and gaudy against the austere elegance of the room. The hostess led them to a solitary table set in the back, slightly elevated. It gave them a view of the entire room, and more importantly, a direct line of sight into the pass, the station where the head chef inspected every plate. "Please wait here," the hostess said, and vanished into the gloom. Vanessa sat down, her hands clutching her clutch bag. "Okay, remember the pitch. We emphasize the brand equity. We tell them we have a loyal customer base." "Look at the pass," Dominic interrupted, ignoring her. He was staring at the figure standing at the head of the kitchen. The man had his back to them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a chef's coat that was black instead of white, tailored to fit like armor. He was inspecting a plate with a pair of long, silver tweezers. He adjusted a single micro-herb, wiped the rim of the plate with a cloth, and nodded. A runner whisked it away. The figure turned. He didn't walk toward the kitchen exit. He walked toward the dining room floor. He moved with a prowling, fluid grace, the heavy boots silent on the polished concrete. As he stepped out of the kitchen's harsh halo and into the amber gloom of the dining room, Vanessa squinted. There was something familiar about the gait. The way he held his shoulders, not hunched anymore, but pulled back, open. He approached their table, stopping at the edge of the spotlight. The shadows obscured his face for a heartbeat longer, holding the suspense like a held breath. "Good evening," the man said. The voice was deeper than Vanessa remembered, rougher, like gravel rolling over velvet. But the cadence, she knew that cadence. He stepped forward, the light hitting his face. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was Gabe, but it wasn't her Gabe. The man standing before her had shed the softness of the husband she knew. His jaw was sharper, defined by a short, meticulously groomed beard that hid the boyish weakness of his chin. His hair was cut close, military style, flecked with distinguished gray at the temples. The glasses were gone, replaced by a gaze that was unblinking and cold. He looked expensive. He looked dangerous. He looked like he owned the building, the block, and the oxygen they were breathing. Dominic choked on his own saliva. Gabe. Gabe didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He simply pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, crossing his legs. He looked at them with the detached curiosity of a biologist examining two insects pinned to a board. "You're late," Gabe said. "I expected better time management from a general manager." "You," Vanessa stammered, her mind reeling, trying to reconcile the image of the man who used to mend her hemlines with this titan sitting across from her. "You own Sanctum?" "I am Sanctum," Gabe corrected softly. He picked up the wine list, glancing at it as if bored. "And you are here because you are bankrupt. Shall we order? Or do you want to leave now and save us all the embarrassment?" Vanessa felt the blood drain from her face. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. The ghost had returned, and he had brought the winter with him. Gabe raised a single finger, and the shadows seemed to detach themselves from the walls. A sommelier appeared instantly, placing 3 glasses on the table. They were delicate, hand-blown crystal, thin as eggshells. "We aren't hungry," Dominic said, his voice trembling slightly. He looked at the menu, which was just a blank card of heavy, textured paper. "We came to talk numbers, Gabe. Assets. Liabilities." "In my house, you eat," Gabe said. His tone was light, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking wood. "Besides, you'll appreciate the irony of the first course." Gabe poured the wine himself. It wasn't a vintage Bordeaux. It was a bright, aggressive red, smelling of cheap tannins and oak chips. Vanessa stared at the label. It was a refined, elevated version of the terrible box wine they used to drink in their first apartment, sitting on the floor because they couldn't afford chairs. A 2018 blend, Gabe said, swirling his glass. Immature, a little acidic, but it had potential, didn't it? Before it turned into vinegar. He took a sip, his eyes locking onto Vanessa's. She felt a flush rising up her neck. He wasn't talking about the wine. Gabe, please, she whispered. Can we just? First course, Gabe announced. A server placed a large, white plate in front of each of them. In the center sat a single, perfectly spherical mound of raw meat, glistening under the spotlight. It was topped with a gelée of cornichon and a dusting of cured egg yolk. Steak tartare, Dominic muttered, trying to regain his footing. Classic. A bit safe for Sanctum, isn't it? Look closer, Gabe said. Dominic leaned in. It's not beef. It's heart, Gabe said softly. Venison heart. Specifically prepared to remove the bitterness, though I find a little bitterness is necessary for character. Vanessa stared at the red mound. Heart. She picked up her fork, her hand shaking. She took a small bite. The flavor was explosive, metallic, rich, and overwhelmingly sad. It tasted like the cold iron of the winter wind. I read your review in the Tribune. Gabe continued, cutting into his own portion with surgical precision. They said the sterling has lost its soul. I found that interesting. You can't lose what you never had, Dominic. You just borrowed mine until you wore it out. Dominic dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. I made you, he hissed, his face reddening. I gave you a kitchen. I gave you a paycheck when you were nobody. You gave me a corner to hide in, Gabe corrected. And I was happy there. Until I wasn't. He gestured for the plates to be cleared. The servers moved in silence, whisking away the unfinished hearts. Second course, Gabe said. This time, the plates were slate gray. On them sat a deconstructed arrangement. A square of seared Wagyu beef, a smear of roasted tomato reduction, a disc of brioche toast, and a foam of cheddar cheese aged for 5 years. Vanessa looked at the plate, and the air left her lungs. It was beautiful, high art on a plate. But the components. Beef, bread, cheese, tomato. Recognize it, Vanessa? Gabe asked, leaning back in his chair, watching her unravel. She looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. It's a burger, Gabe said, his voice devoid of humor. Since that's my specialty. Flipping burgers. Isn't that what you told the investors? That I was just the help? I didn't mean. Vanessa started, but the lie died in her throat. Go on, Gabe urged. Taste it. It's the most expensive burger you will ever eat. It cost me my marriage. It cost me 5 years of my life. Dominic looked between them, confused, missing the nuance of the private wound. He saw only food. He cut a piece of the Wagyu and chewed. His eyes widened. The technique was flawless. The texture was impossible. It was better than anything Dominic had cooked in his entire career. My God, Dominic whispered, defeated by the flavor. It's about respect for the ingredients, Gabe said, his gaze never leaving Vanessa. You see, in a kitchen, you don't waste anything. You don't throw away the trimmings. And you certainly don't throw away the person who keeps the fire burning. He stood up, towering over them. The meal wasn't a hospitality, it was an autopsy. Enjoy the course, Gabe said, buttoning his jacket. I have to check the line. When you're finished, we'll discuss the acquisition. But I warn you, the price has gone up since the appetizer. He turned and walked back toward the glass-walled kitchen, leaving them alone with the exquisite, heartbreaking taste of their own cruelty. Come, Gabe said, rising from the table. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. He led them toward the glass wall. Up close, the barrier seemed to dissolve, bringing the hum of the kitchen into sharp focus. Unlike the cacophony at the Sterling, the soundscape here was a rhythmic, hypnotic drone. The shhhshhh of sharp steel on wooden blocks. The soft hiss of gas burners. The synchronized "we, chef" that murmured through the room like a prayer every time Gabe raised a hand. Dominic walked in with his mouth slightly open. He looked like a tourist in a cathedral. He ran a hand along the stainless steel pass, checking for dust. There was none. He peered at the sauce station, looking for broken emulsions or scorched pans. There were none. The discipline. Dominic muttered, half to himself. How do you get them to work like this? No shouting? Fear commands obedience, Gabe said, stopping at the expediter station. Respect commands loyalty. You never learn the difference. He turned to a sous chef, a young woman with a scar running through her eyebrow. Take Mr. Sterling to the fermentation lab. Show him the Koji cultures. He thinks he wants to pioneer fusion. Let him see what real chemistry looks like. Dominic hesitated, looking back at Vanessa, but his ego won out. The promise of seeing proprietary tech was too tempting. He followed the sous chef, leaving Vanessa alone with Gabe in the center of the gleaming steel labyrinth. Gabe, Vanessa started, her voice dropping to a whisper. The kitchen staff ignored her, their eyes glued to their stations, but she felt exposed. We need to talk. Privately. Gabe looked at her, then nodded toward the heavy steel door at the back of the prep area. I need to check the inventory. You can talk while I work. He walked to the walk-in refrigerator and pulled the heavy latch. Vanessa followed him inside. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing with a pneumatic hiss that cut off the noise of the kitchen instantly. The silence was absolute, broken only by the aggressive hum of the cooling fans. The air was frigid, hovering just above freezing, smelling of fresh thyme, hanging meats, and cold earth. Gabe didn't look at her. He walked to a shelf of produce, picking up a crate of heirlooms carrots. He began inspecting them, tossing bruised ones into a compost bin with efficient, brutal movements. It's cold, Vanessa said, wrapping her arms around herself. Her silk dress offered no protection against the chill. 36 degrees, Gabe stated, not turning around. Ideal for preservation. Keeps the rot away. Is that what this is? She asked, stepping closer. Preservation? You kept the ring, Gabe. I know you did. You didn't pawn it. I threw it in a bowl of soup, Vanessa. I assumed the garbage disposal ate it. I kept it, she lied. She moved into his peripheral vision, her breath fogging in the air. I kept it in my nightstand. Every night. She reached out, her hand hovering over the sleeve of his chef's coat. She remembered the body underneath the fabric. She remembered how he used to hold her when she cried about a bad day at work. She needed that man now. She needed the softness she had exploited. We were a team, Gabe, she pleaded, her voice trembling. We were young. We made mistakes. I got caught up in the fame. I admit that. But I did it for us. I wanted us to be on top. Gabe stopped sorting the carrots. He turned slowly. His eyes were colder than the air pumping through the vents. For us, he repeated. You introduced me as a burger flipper. You erased me. I was drunk. I was stupid. Vanessa stepped in, closing the gap. She placed a hand on his chest. The fabric was stiff, unyielding. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Dominic. Dominic is a fraud. You know that. I know that. We can take him down together. Merge the companies. You run the food, I run the front. Just like we dreamed. She looked up at him, summoning every ounce of seduction she possessed. She tilted her head, her eyes wide and watery. I miss you, Gabe. I miss my husband. Gabe looked down at her hand on his chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He simply stared at it as if it were a foreign object, a contaminant on his sterile uniform. Your husband froze to death 5 years ago, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of anger, which was infinitely worse. You're talking to a chef, and you are trespassing in my walk-in. He reached up and removed her hand from his chest, gripping her wrist with just enough pressure to be firm, not enough to bruise. He held it away from him, then dropped it. The deal is purely financial, Vanessa. You have nothing else to offer me. Not your skills, not your apology, and certainly not your affection. He turned back to the shelf, picking up a crate of microgreens. Dominic should be done in the lab, he said, dismissing her. Don't let the door hit you. It seals tight. Vanessa stood there, shivering violently now, her teeth chattering. The rejection was total. He hadn't just said no. He had looked at her and felt nothing. The emotional leverage she thought she held, the shared history, the intimacy, was gone. It had expired, just like the bruised carrots in the bin. She turned and pushed the heavy safety release handle. The door opened with a gasp of pressure, spilling her back out into the warmth of the kitchen, leaving Gabe alone in the cold, perfectly preserved in his indifference. Vanessa walked out of the kitchen, her skin still prickling from the phantom cold of the walk-in refrigerator. The humiliation of Gabe's rejection sat heavy in her stomach, a cold stone that no amount of wine could dissolve. She had offered him her vulnerability, her past, and her body, and he had looked at her like she was a supplier delivering spoiled produce. She navigated the corridor toward the fermentation lab, looking for Dominic. She needed to get him out of here. The deal was dead. She knew it. Gabe wasn't going to merge. He was going to consume them. They needed to leave before they lost their dignity entirely. The door to the lab was a heavy, frosted glass panel. Through it, she saw a shadow moving frantically. It wasn't the slow, respectful observation of a professional. It was the jerky, panicked motion of a thief. Vanessa pushed the door open. The lab was a sterile wonderland of glass jars filled with amber liquids, vacuum-sealed bags of aging proteins, and humidity-controlled chambers. It smelled of yeast and deep, savory funk, the smell of time doing its work. Dominic was not looking at the jars. He was standing at a stainless steel workstation in the back corner. He had pulled open a drawer and was hunched over it, his phone out, the camera flash flickering rapidly in the dim light. "Dominic?" Vanessa asked, her voice sharp. Dominic jumped, nearly dropping his phone. He spun around, his eyes wild, sweat beading on his upper lip despite the climate control. "Close the door," he hissed, waving her over. "Van, look at this. Look." Vanessa stepped forward, a knot of dread tightening in her chest. Lying open on the metal counter was a tattered, leather-bound notebook. The cover was stained with grease and oil, the corners worn soft with age. It was Gabe's notebook, the one he had taken the night he left, the one that contained the soul of the Sterling. "He kept it," Dominic whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and greed. "He has my recipes in here. The original venison reduction, the scallop emulsion. It's all here." "Those aren't your recipes, Dominic," Vanessa said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "They are my intellectual property." Dominic snapped, his face flushing an ugly mottled red. "I paid his salary. I bought the ingredients. That makes them mine." He went back to photographing the pages, his fingers fumbling with the screen. "If we get these back, if I can reverse engineer what he's doing with the Koji, we don't need the merger. We can relaunch. We can crush him." Vanessa watched him. For 5 years, she had told herself that Dominic was the visionary and Gabe was just the mechanic. She had convinced herself that Dominic's charisma was the secret ingredient. But standing here, watching him frantically stealing ideas from a 5-year-old notebook belonging to the man he despised, the delusion finally shattered. Dominic wasn't a chef. He was a parasite, and she had let him feed on the only real thing she had ever had. "Stop it," Vanessa said, her voice low. "I'm almost done," Dominic muttered, turning a page so hard it nearly tore. "Just the fermentation ratios. That's the key." "I said stop it." Vanessa lunged forward, grabbing his wrist. "You're pathetic, Dominic. Look at you. You're standing in a multi-million-dollar facility, surrounded by innovation, and you're stealing notes from 2018 because you can't cook an egg without help." Dominic shoved her back. "I am doing this for us. For the brand." "There is no brand," Vanessa screamed, the facade breaking completely. "It's over. We're bankrupt, the food is garbage, and we are standing in the house of the man we ruined, begging for scraps." "Done begging." A deep voice resonated from the doorway. Vanessa and Dominic both froze. Gabe was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't just arrived, he had been watching. He looked at Dominic's phone, then at the open notebook, and finally at Vanessa's terrified face. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, like a parent watching a child fail a test they had already cheated on. "I left that drawer unlocked on purpose," Gabe said calmly, walking into the room. "I wanted to see if you had changed. If you had grown enough to ask me for the recipe instead of trying to take it." He stopped in front of Dominic, who was clutching the phone like a shield. "Put the phone down, Dominic," Gabe said. "The recipe won't help you. You can copy the notes, but you can't copy the hands." I was just checking the attribution," Dominic stammered, backing up until he hit the counter. "You were stealing," Gabe corrected. "Again." He reached past Dominic and gently closed the notebook. He picked it up, dusting off the cover with a reverence that made Vanessa's heart ache. "The tasting menu is finished," Gabe said, his voice dropping an octave, turning hard as granite. "Now, we move to the final course. My office. Bring the phone." He turned and walked out. Dominic looked at Vanessa, his eyes pleading for a plan, for a spin, for a way out. But Vanessa just stared at him, feeling nothing but a profound, exhausting emptiness. She turned and followed Gabe, leaving Dominic alone with the jars of things that had grown and evolved while he had stayed exactly the same. Gabe's office sat high above the dining floor, a glass box suspended in the darkness of the warehouse rafters. It was soundproof to the point of oppression. When the heavy door clicked shut behind them, the hum of the ventilation system vanished, leaving a silence so profound Vanessa could hear the blood rushing in her own ears. There was no desk, just a round table made of reclaimed scorched timber and 3 chairs. On the table sat a single black folder. Gabe walked to the window, looking down at the kitchen below. From this height, the chefs looked like soldiers moving pieces on a map. He didn't invite them to sit. "The phone, Dominic," Gabe said, his back turned. Dominic hesitated, clutching the device like a lifeline. "This is illegal. You can't just detain us here. I'm calling my lawyer." "Call him," Gabe said, turning around slowly. "Ask him about the shell company in the Cayman Islands registered under DS Holdings. Ask him about the invoices for truffle imports that never arrived, but were paid for by your investors." Dominic froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it the shade of wet ash. I don't know what you're talking about." "I do," Gabe said. He walked to the table and flipped the black folder open. "I've been buying your debt for 18 months, Dominic. Every time a vendor threatened to cut you off, a holding company called EV Associates stepped in and bought the note. Do you know what EV stands for?" Vanessa stared at the folder. "EV, Escoffier Vengeance? No. Elena Vance? No, that was another life." Then it hit her. Ex-Vanessa, or perhaps simply into vanity. "You own our debt," Vanessa whispered. "I own your stove. I own your chairs. I own the lien on your liquor license," Gabe corrected. "And I own the paper trail of the $300,000 you skimmed from the employee pension fund to pay for your lease on the Bentley." Dominic slumped into a chair, his legs giving out. He dropped the phone on the table. It clattered like a surrender. "You audited us," Dominic wheezed. "I didn't have to. You're sloppy," Gabe said, his voice devoid of triumph, just cold facts. "You fired your accountant 3 times in 2 years. Disgruntled employees talk, especially when the new owner of their debt offers them a consulting fee." Gabe placed his hands on the table, leaning in. The overhead light cast deep shadows over his eyes. "Here is the situation. Sanctum is not merging with the Sterling. We are acquiring the physical assets to turn it into a prep kitchen for our catering division. The brand Dominic Sterling will cease to exist at midnight." "You can't do that," Dominic whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. "My name. It's all I have." "Your name is Mud," Gabe said. "You have 2 choices. Option A, you sign the transfer of ownership tonight. I absorb the liabilities. You walk away with nothing, but you walk away free. No lawsuits, no press, no prison." He tapped the folder. "Option B, I hand this file to the IRS and the Labor Department tomorrow morning. You go to federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. Vanessa goes down as an accomplice for signing the falsified quarterly reports." Vanessa's head snapped up. "I didn't know. He told me the numbers were adjusted for depreciation." "You're the general manager, Vanessa," Gabe said, looking at her with a pity that cut deeper than hate. "Ignorance isn't a defense. It's just another failure." He slid a heavy fountain pen across the table. It stopped perfectly in front of Dominic. "The transfer papers are under the dossier," Gabe said. "Sign it, both of you." "And if we sign?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling. "What happens to us?" "I don't care," Gabe said. "Move to Florida. Open a taco stand. Retire. Just get out of my city." Dominic picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He didn't look at the contract. He didn't read the terms. He just signed, a messy scrawl that looked nothing like the autograph he used to sign on cookbooks. He pushed the papers to Vanessa. She looked at Gabe one last time. She wanted him to scream at her. She wanted him to tell her he hated her. Anything to acknowledge that she had mattered. But he was already looking out the window, watching his kitchen, checking his watch. He had already moved on to the next service. Vanessa picked up the pen. She signed her name, signing away the restaurant, the dream, and the last tether to the life she thought she deserved. Done, she whispered. Gabe picked up the papers, checked the signatures, and closed the folder. Leave the phone, Gabe said to Dominic. It's company property now. He walked to the door and held it open. Get out. The walk from Gabe's office to the exit was the longest mile Vanessa had ever traveled. They passed the open kitchen, but the rhythmic shhhshhh of the knives didn't stop. Not a single chef looked up. The discipline Gabe had instilled was absolute. To his team, Vanessa and Dominic were already ghosts, irrelevant static in the air. The hostess in the black architectural dress was waiting by the heavy steel door. She didn't offer a polite farewell. She simply pressed the release bar and held the door open, letting the freezing wind invade the corridor. Goodbye, she said. It sounded like a sentence. Dominic stumbled out first, his shoes slipping on the cobblestones. He looked smaller without the artificial lighting of a dining room to prop him up. Vanessa followed, the heavy doors slamming shut behind her with a final, resonant thud that vibrated in her teeth. The silence of the meatpacking district was deafening. The snow was falling harder now, thick wet flakes that clung to eyelashes and melted into freezing rivulets down necks. You. Dominic turned on her, his voice cracking. He wiped his nose with the sleeve of his cashmere coat, ruining the fabric. You told me this would work. You told me we could charm him. Go home, Dominic, Vanessa said, her voice hollow. She hugged her arms around herself, shivering violently. Home? I don't have a home. Dominic screamed, his voice echoing off the brick warehouses. He took the lease. He took the brand. I'm nothing. He stared at her with wild, hateful eyes. I should have fired you 5 years ago. I should have kept him and fired you. He turned and began to run down the street, flailing for a taxi that wasn't there, a desperate, broken figure disappearing into the white void of the storm. Vanessa didn't follow him. She couldn't move. Her feet felt frozen to the pavement, but it wasn't just the cold. It was the gravity of the building behind her. She walked slowly along the side of the warehouse until she found the long, horizontal window that looked into the kitchen. It was street level, offering a worm's eye view of the world she had just been exiled from. Inside, the service was ending. The frantic energy had settled into a calm, cleaning rhythm. The stainless steel was being scrubbed until it mirrored the lights. And there was Gabe. He was standing at the pass, alone. The other chefs were packing their knife rolls, laughing softly among themselves, sharing the camaraderie of a battle survived. Gabe wasn't leaving yet. He was wiping down the counter, his movements slow, deliberate, and reverent. He paused. He reached for a small tasting spoon and dipped it into a pot of stock that was simmering for the next day. He tasted it. He closed his eyes. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. It wasn't the polite smile he used to wear at parties for her benefit. It wasn't the nervous smile he wore when he asked if she liked his cooking. It was the smile of a man who was exactly where he belonged. A man who needed no applause, no awards, and no audience. He was whole. Vanessa pressed her hand against the cold glass. Her breath fogged the pain, obscuring him for a second. She wiped it away frantically, wanting one last look. Inside, Gabe opened his eyes. He tapped the spoon on the edge of the pot, cleaned it, and placed it in the sink. He reached up and flipped the switch for the pass lights. Click. The kitchen went dark. Gabe disappeared into the shadows, walking toward the back office to plan tomorrow's menu. He never looked at the window. He never sensed her presence. She was just another shadow in a city full of them. Vanessa pulled her hand back from the glass. Her fingers were numb. The darkness inside the building was absolute, leaving her with only the reflection of her own face in the glass, pale, distorted, and alone. She turned away from the building. The wind howled down the alley, biting through her silk dress, demanding payment for the warmth she had squandered. Vanessa Stone lowered her head against the storm and began to walk, disappearing into the Chicago night, leaving no footprints that the snow wouldn't cover by morning.